Oh, g'day mate, 40 here. So I was just listening to a teaching company course on Screenwriting 101, and it said that in the heroic genre, the character changes the story world that he's in. So I think about Richard Spencer in 2016 after Trump was elected. He had this idea that he had helped to elect Donald Trump. He saw himself as heroic. That's why he kept talking about Hail Victory. And he saw himself as changing the world. So that's the heroic genre. People see themselves as changing the world. And then in the comic and tragic genres, the story world, people have to submit to the story world. So in comedy, people have all sorts of delusions about themselves, and then over the course of the comedy they come to accept reality. They come to accept the world around them, and they make peace with it, and they even find joy in the world around them that they thought they were going to be able to transcend, but they eventually make peace and find joy. Now, American comedies, the last few decades, there's often a heroic element where the protagonist doesn't just make peace with the world around him, he may even transcend it, improve it, or change it. But classic comedy and classic tragedy is that the world is stronger than the characters. Classic comedy and tragedy, characters have to, they're beaten down by the outside world. They don't get to transcend it. The world wins. So it's really only with Shakespeare on that we have this idea that individuals can change the world. Pretty much prior to Shakespeare, the literature was all about people being forced to accept the reality of the world rather than the individual changing the world. So you saw with Richard Spencer after Trump was elected, he talked a lot about, we got Trump elected, that, Hail Victory, we were indispensable for Trump's victory. He saw himself very much as this world transforming figure. And then when he was humiliated by the Hailgate aftermath, he felt almost broken. Right, he almost collapsed, he said. And why did he almost collapse? Because his vision of himself as this heroic figure who could change the world was completely smashed. And he experienced the world was humbling him. He was being brought down to reality. So Richard sees himself very much as a classically heroic figure who's capable of changing the world around him. So when the world around him bites back and humbles and humiliates him, that's absolutely crushing experience for Richard and for anyone who sees himself as a hero. So there are a lot of people in 2016 after Trump's victory saw themselves as heroic characters, right? That they'd taken part of this heroic movement to change the world. They had transformed the world around them. And then 2020 comes around, Trump loses, and people are responding with rage, with bizarre conspiracy theories, and with a lot of apathy. So I heard a great comment this morning that apathy is the result of an inability to process or to deal with anger or fear. So people who are unable to deal with the reality of Joe Biden's victory, that Trump is being defeated, then why are they turning to apathy? Because they're unable to deal with their fear and their anger about what happened in the 2020 election. They're unable to face the future of America after all this rhetoric leading into the 2020 election about how this was the most important election ever. Now they saw, wow, America's lost. So remember We had the 2016 essay, the Flight 93 election, that the people were going to storm the cockpit, try to take back the plane, because if they did storm the cockpit, the plane might still crash. Blessings to Elliot Blatt, but if you don't storm the cockpit, then the plane absolutely will crash. So by that same logic, now in 2020, the cockpit has been defended by the ruling elites, so you don't get to storm the cockpit anymore. And for those who felt heroic in 2016, being part of a movement to change the world, to do the impossible, it's very hard to process that this movement's been defeated in 2020. And so if your reaction is apathy, then it's the inability to process fear and anger, right? You're so immobilized by your fear and your anger. You don't know what to do with your fear and your anger. So you lapse back into apathy, right? Cynicism is what happens when you care about something and it's so painful that you don't get what you care about and you can't deal with it. And so you lapse into cynicism to protect yourself. And apathy, again, that's sort of a self-protective device. I don't want to deal with the pain of losing. I don't want to deal with the pain of not getting what I want. I can't face the loss, having the country turned over to a different political establishment. So I'm just going to check out either through cynicism or apathy, right? So I think a lot of people probably got an exaggerated sense of their own importance with Trump's victory in 2016. Trump's improbable victory gave them the sense, hey, I can change the world. Well, perspective more rooted in reality would be, yes, I can be a part of a world transforming movement and I can play a small role. But if your takeaway from the 2016 election was that you can change the world, then it's going to be very painful to deal with the consequences of 2020. Right? Suddenly, the world refuses to bend to your will. So I think for many people on the dissident right, they had this exciting moment in 2016 when they experienced the world as bending to their will. And now, after that election, they increasingly experienced themselves having to bend to the inexorable forces around them. So they're increasing speech restrictions on social media. They might deal with social opprobrium, isolation, getting fired, getting shunned. Right? The world fights back. The world fights back. The world gets a vote. It's not just an inanimate force that you act upon, but it also acts upon you. So I like reading this screenwriting book, Screenwriting 101. I knew Richard Spencer thought he was changing the world. Rustin, good to see you, mate. No, I think a lot of people thought they were changing the world with Donald Trump. I think a lot of people had an exaggerated sense of their own importance. And you can always know if you have an exaggerated sense of your own importance, that is, you will be continually humiliated. So it's hard to think of anyone in the dissident right sphere who is engaged in more ongoing, routine, repetitious humiliation than Richard Spencer. So you only get humiliated when you get out of touch with reality. Right? When you lose an appropriate sense of your own importance. But a ton of other people, in addition to Richard on the dissident right, got humiliated. I mean, the Right Stuff crew, they dramatically changed their tone over the past 4 years. So the last 3 years, they've become much more careful in the things they say. Daily Stormer, Andrew Anglin, has had to have a complete change of tone. Like he's gotten rid of the slurs, doing things very differently. So many people have just left the dissident right completely. Other people have gotten fired, having to rebuild their lives because they got out of touch with reality. So it's exhilarating to see yourself as a classical hero who is changing the world around him. But the dominant historical genres are that the world changes you. So that's classical tragedy, that's classical comedy. So in comedy, you become reconciled to reality and you're able to find joy in it. In tragedy, the thing that you fear most bites you, and you succumb to your greatest fear. No matter what you do, you end up succumbing to your greatest fear. So that's classical tragedy. So what's the solution? The solution is to be right-sized, have an appropriate sense of your own importance in the various interactions that you have. So in some interactions, it's for you to take charge. It's for you to preside. It's for you to speak out. In other interactions, it's for you to take directions. Other interactions, it's for you to just be a worker among workers, just one of the team. And this kind of rootedness in reality, one's much less likely to get humiliated. Like if you're, like I got this guy, he's a drunk, right? He's usually seems intoxicated when I hear from him. And today he was telling me, Luke, I just seem drunk because you only have a 120 IQ and I have a 150 IQ. So that when you interact with someone who's so much more intelligent than you, they're just going to seem intoxicated to you. So it's not unusual that you have someone leave a mental asylum and then want to start telling other people what to do, right? You've got the guy with his hospital tag still on his wrist. He's just gotten out of hospital after a psychotic break. And the first thing he wants to do is get out onto a busy intersection and start directing traffic. So many of the people on the distant right sphere who are most eager to take charge of America, right? They're the equivalent of mental patients who've made a break and they still got the hospital tag around their wrist. But the first thing they want to do is get out onto busy intersections and direct the traffic. Well, Luke, the reason you think I'm drunk is because I'm just so much more intelligent than you, right? So I got this one guy who probably messaged me 40 times, and more than 50% of these messages are, I am so much more intelligent than you are, let me give you some advice. It's like, look, I've produced TV programs that have had tens of millions of viewers, and I look up this guy's name. Yes, I've heard the song "We Could Be Heroes Just for One Day" by David Bowie. So this guy was saying, look, I've produced TV programs that had 10 million viewers, so let me tell you what you're doing wrong. So I go over to IMDb, and there's no mention of this guy. So someone with no qualifications. Like, what kind of person sliding into my DMs and more than half the time is doing it to tell me how he's got a 150 IQ? And it's bizarre, but it's just the very sort of bizarreness, lack of connection with reality that is just so typical among people in the distant right sphere. I had no idea that the antisocial, pathological nature of many people on the distant right, really until just the last 5 years in particular. But it very much resembles, in the degree of pathology, the porn industry, where people thought that they were they were the equivalent of Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman. I remember this porn star, Herschel Savage. Like he got his hands in concrete for some memorial at the Hustler Hollywood store, and I very much thought of himself as kind of the acting equivalent of Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman, which is a little bit delusional. And similar with those on the alt-right who felt like they got Donald Trump elected. So I think we can make a difference in the world, and that's when we become part of something that's larger than ourselves, whether it's a church, a synagogue, political movement, a social movement, a cultural movement. I think we can change the world around us when we do the things that we're best at. So if we're a painter, we should paint. If we're naturally predisposed to live streaming, we should live stream. If we're a director, we should direct. If we're poets, we should write poetry. If we're business-minded, we should run a business. Right, so when we do the things that we're best at, then we can make a difference in the world around us. But generally speaking, we have to adapt to reality. And it's not for the world to adapt to us. We have to be right present where our feet are. So this is where my feet are, right? There's rubbish and there's trash, and this is where I am right now. We must learn Torah, says Robert. Yes. And there will be times when we can be heroic and make a difference in the world around us. Generally speaking, it's up to us to adapt to the world around us. The world around us is not going to adapt to us. And it's much better to have a life that is comedic than a life that is tragic. So in comedy, remember, we adapt to the world around us and we find joy in that. In a tragedy, our greatest fears become reality. So, whether we want it or not, whether we're good at it or not, Yidden must learn Torah. Okay, so traffic. Traffic is a wonderful opportunity to get in touch with reality. So if you rage when you're in traffic, right, you're losing touch with reality. Also, the more things that you have in your life that you have no control over, the more challenging it's going to be. So I've purposefully created a life where I will very rarely have a long commute. So pretty much in my life, I've never had a regular commute longer than about 20 minutes. So I can imagine how frustrating it is to have an hour-long commute. So much of that's going to be out of your control. Now it's an opportunity for spiritual growth. But back to the main topic, apathy. It's a result of being unable to process fear and anger. So we don't need to use politics, an obsession with politics, try to distract ourselves from the gaping wounds in our own life, right? We don't have to distract ourselves from sadness, from fear, from anger by building up delusional political worlds. It's much better to just deal with these things directly through therapy, or a good 12-step program, through journaling, provide ourselves with the attention, understanding and compassion that we want other people to give us. Because if we go around needy, hoping for attention, compassion, understanding from other people, that's going to make us not very fun to be around. But yeah, we can be heroes just for one day. We have opportunities to make a difference in the world around us. But generally speaking, it's going to be up to us to make peace with the greater world around us. It's not going to make peace. It's not going to bend to us most of the time. We're going to have to bend to it.